Hello everyone. Thank you very much for coming here today. So we have the pleasure of being able to have our guest here, Mr. Josh Chu, and he's a former expert in the Web3 space. But just before I ask him to start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our programs. We have the postgraduate diploma in fintech and legal regulations. This is basically a postgraduate level program, QF level 5, so equivalent to a master's program. It's a combination of learning about fintech and also the legal structure around the fintech space. Okay. We also have another program, postgraduate diploma in finance and law. So if you're interested in finance and law, this is a great program. Again, for people who have legal background and want to know about finance, it's a great program. For people who have finance background and want to learn more about the law, is also a fantastic program. Okay, so let me hand over the mic to Mr. Chu, and he's going to tell you all about the Web3 space. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Thomas. Thank you all for making the time to attend our course here, our 1 hour seminar here. As many thanks to those that made it physically as well as online. I do understand today is a Sunday, and and a lot of people might have other things to do, such as dating somebody. But fortunately, as a geek, I'm fully available in that regard. So basically, before I introduce who I am, this is basically a very quick outline of the 1 hour long seminar today. We'll have a very quick introduction of who I am, and the biggest question that might be on everyone's mind, which is why Web3 or 5. I will also quickly go into what happened to Web4 during that section. Then, of course, we'll talk about hidden crisis, about the past projects that we have seen. A lot of people have seen the rise and fall of a lot of crypto projects over the past year, and would naturally wonder what other legal and regulatory risk entails if you are to jump into this space, and the potential solutions going forward as well. And most importantly, at the end of the day, we do have a surprise for everyone that has attended, that is in attendance. Is we will have an NFT drop, because we do want you to leave with something after this course and after knowing what it is, because there's nothing like a real experience of the Web3 space than to have some assets going forward as well. So without further ado, a very quick introduction of myself. My name is Joshua Chu, and I will be your entertainment, of course, for the next 1 hour. I'm currently occupying multiple capacities. On the legal aspect, I am a fully qualified lawyer in Hong Kong. I'm currently the Group Chief Risk Officer at XBE, and we have a number of listed entities under my watch, which includes most notably Collectibles and Marvion. I'll have a very quick introduction on what those two companies do as well, which give you a live demonstration of the opportunities within the Web3 space. I'm also currently a business and regulatory consultant with ProSynergy, and some of the more credible elements with this company is the fact that it's founded by former regulators with the SFC. So the company was founded by some of the most senior people that were former regulators, which at the director level. So the company is founded by Louis Lee, who actually wrote the structured product code for the SFC. So every now and then there's, of course, soft consultation on how to interpret the law. So we used to joke that whilst lawyers are half the time right and half the time wrong when they issue a legal opinion, ProSynergy is in a unique position on giving the opinion on what regulators would think about each element of a case. So that's for some of you who are interested in going into the regulatory view, this might be interesting as well. I'm also currently a subcommittee member with the NFT Association of Hong Kong, which is one of the first NGOs in Hong Kong that does responsible blockchain education, and that's what we're pushing for. So a little bit more background about about myself. I started my career as an IT professional before really transitioning into becoming a lawyer. So it's also because of the fact that I am an IT professional that I actually very fortunately landed on Hong Kong's first crypto litigation back in 2015 and 2016. Now, those who have known me, of course, would know that there's a reason why I'm in a tie and suit before you today. It's because back in the day when I won the first crypto litigation for Bitfinex, my client did offer to pay my legal fees in Bitcoins. And the conversion rate at that time was $286 to one Bitcoin. Of course, Bitcoin today is $25,000 to one Bitcoin. Unfortunately, the partner at the law firm that I was working at that time told my client Hong Kong dollar only. That's the reason why I am still very much poor and not floating on a yacht somewhere in the Pacific Ocean instead. Of course, I've also pushed in my past life as a private practice practitioner. I've also worked on a number of contentious matters which resulted in landmark judgments in Hong Kong, including Hong Kong's very first High Court decision that introduced the use of data room as a mode of legal service. So basically, in the past, before that judgment, when you want to serve legal papers on an opponent, you have to do it physically. We really we changed the dynamics by introducing the digital elements so that it's a much more green manner of conducting legal practice, but at the same time using more technology. So I'm all things technology when it comes to it. I've also done a number of cybersecurity audits for financial institutions, banks, as well as card companies alike. So that's about it, and I'll move on to who we are and what we do. Now, I've mentioned that I'm currently the Group Chief Risk Officer at XBE, and underneath us we have a number of different companies that will demonstrate how the opportunities within Web3 space. We have the first company, Coinlectables. As the name suggests, it's actually a company that deals with fine arts. Now, the interesting elements to it is we basically created a new product called Digital Ownership Token, where instead of selling Chinese antiques and artworks in the traditional sense, which takes at least 3 to 6 months to complete each transaction, when you tokenize an asset, you can enable it to have instantaneous transaction after tokenization because it's on a web platform. So we often compare it's like having, instead of having back in the 90s when you try to buy stock from the stock market, it takes a whole day to complete the transaction. But after the introduction of something called the internet, instead of having the order book system, we have the automatic market maker, which enables instantaneous transaction today. So I don't think a lot of the bankers at IFC would be able to survive waiting a full day before the transaction is complete, because the price would have crashed or went up substantially. And we are actually using technology, and I'll go more into details in how to enable that those transactions. Marvion, on the other hand, deals mostly with IP and entertainment, because we have found a way to basically tokenize IP intangible assets as well. So this, of course, as an example of how we found opportunities in this space is, in the past, we have movies like Infernal Affairs in Hong Kong. It was remade into The Departed in Hollywood. And when they did the IP transaction, it was a bundle deal. Basically, the entire thing sold for X amount of dollars to Hollywood. Now, with tokenization, you're able to tokenize individual IP rights and sell them that way. So basically, instead of having very limited commercialization opportunities with individual IPs, The way that we have done it, which I'll explain later how we did it, have created a lot of economic opportunities within this space. And all this is made possible by blockchain and Web3 technologies, which I'll explain why it is such the next thing going forward. We also have Morpho Digital AI, which is an AI company, and I won't go further into details until later. But these companies are live demonstration of the commercialization opportunities within this space. So, to start today's discussion, the first question on everyone's mind is, why Web3? So we'll go in three parts. We'll go in a glimpse into the startup space pre-90s, which is basically pre-internet era. And some of you might not have even been born yet. So, but there was a time where the world is much further apart, and the way that business either succeed or fail is quite different. Then we'll also talk about the opportunities brought about Web3 innovations and resulting in the Web3 vision and mission. Now, if we look into the past, and we do see elements of the past still all over the place around us, there used to be a sense that one of the key critical elements for business, whether they survive or die off, is the idea of location, very geographical. In the past, it's actually often joked that it doesn't matter if you can make the best noodles. The fact that you don't have prime real estate could spell failure for your business, because no one will be able to smell it, no one will be able to see it, no one will actually know you even exist. And that is why you see such, in Hong Kong, you still see something called grade A offices, because people will not visit your company unless you're in prime location. Now, of course, COVID has revolutionized that because everyone is stuck at home. But it really brings about a question of whether physical space is still that important. Now, of course, full disclosure, our company is founded by Dr. Herbert Lee, which is actually part of the Lee family. That's on the Henderson side. And so I'm actually, whenever we say real estate is no longer important, might piss off certain members of the family. That having been said, there's always been questions about access to customers, rent and logistics and costs. Now, Hong Kong has always been said to be a very expensive city to live in. A lot of people from all over the world do relocate to Hong Kong for very good opportunities, be it from the mainland, be it from Southeast Asia. They always see Hong Kong as a very good jurisdiction to come to. So there are several reasons why Hong Kong is a great place. One, it's actually a tier 1 financial center, but at the same time, it's also the gateway into China, etc. But the result is when companies try to attract talents from overseas, one of the biggest costs is actually how will they pay for the relocation costs for expatriates into Hong Kong. And that has actually been very substantial, because when you talk about relocation of an expatriate foreign talent, you have to pay for the trip to Hong Kong, you have to pay for their room and board and accommodations, you have to pay for even their family uprooting to come to Hong Kong. With Web3, however, we will be demonstrating on how that Web3 actually enables people from all over the world to work in a Hong Kong company. So this is actually quite attractive to a lot of what we call digital nomads, because with the properly drafted employment contract, you can enjoy the 13 to 17% tax rates of Hong Kong, but without having to relocate to Hong Kong. So so just imagine if you're able to get the salary you're getting paid in Hong Kong, but live in Bangkok. You can live like a king, really. Or even any parts of China or Southeast Asia, you can buy a mansion. So that really creates something work-life consideration behind the scene. Now, the dawn of the internet is one thing we can see is that technology really advanced rapidly, especially with the passing of the millennia. Since 2000, your computer on your phone today is probably far more sophisticated than the best computers back in 2000. In fact, your phone has better processing power than a lot of the satellites in orbit of this planet today. That's how fast technology are advancing. And with the introduction of the smartphone and the proliferation of the use of technology, it really brought the world so much closer. So with everyone being able to access the internet, prime real estate suddenly changed from, instead of being a shop on Nathan Road or your office in Central, to the best domain on the internet. It's often said that your first impression of a company is made online. And it really begs the question of, does it really justify all these firms paying huge amounts of money for a grade A office? And for startup companies, it really begs the question of, do you really have to basically raise several $1 million just to pay the rent for a prime real estate to have a real working startup company? And you can see that the age of the internet has enabled top digital influencers to actually make as much money as CEO of oil companies. So the introduction of the internet and the smartphone really changed the dynamics of how businesses run. In fact, today, just because you have an office in Central, if you don't have an online presence, your business might fade away, because people are no longer simply traveling the streets of Hong Kong looking for the next startup or the next best experience. They will look online to reviews, to photos, and to other means of promoting. So the way that marketing is done and the way that operations is done has changed substantially over the years. So this has, we can see on this as an example, the cost of failing to basically evolve into a digital company today can be the failure of a business. So even music makers are wondering, can the industry really pay again? Now, of course, this will be the part where we'll be briefly talking about webbing through time. I think a lot recently, especially the course titled Web3, we have often asked ourselves, why is it called Web3? Actually, the internet has gone through many generations of iteration already. Back in the day, Web 1.0, when internet speed is extremely slow, which is where you have, it takes you several minutes just to load the picture, we have what we call the read-only web. Basically, the first iteration of web space is basically what you call a research archive, is putting the library on the internet. Web 2.0, on the other hand, is where you have interactive website, which is the most prevalent website today. The dot-com boom happened as Web 1 transitioned into Web 2. And we will be talking about how Web 3 is undergoing similar scenarios, because you have seen the rise and fall of a lot of blockchain themed businesses, which is actually quite similar to what the dot-com boom and bust happened. Back in the 90s and the early 2000s, when the dot-com boom happened, domain names, internet website address actually skyrocketed in value. But today we can see that domain names are actually quite cheap. It's actually the branding behind that has value. And that's how you can assess the value of a Web3 business as well. If your business does not have any value behind it, that means it's all hype and no substance. And I'll talk about the dangers of that later in this seminar. So Web3 is what we have right now. We have Meta, we have all these blockchain companies. Web3 is basically the idea of giving a data owner more control over their data. Now, we did skim over. When Web3 actually first, the whole concept started circulating on the internet and the markets, a lot of people started talking about Web 5, which is where Jack Dorsey actually talked about Web 5. Web 5 is what we call the seamless integration and interoperation between user experience in Web 2 space as well as all the control advocated in Web 3 space. So a lot of people ask me what happened to Web 4. Well, because Jack Dorsey seemed to have just jumped from Web 3 to Web 5. And we used to joke that, well, the number 4 in Chinese is not that auspicious. That's why a lot of people just jumped over it. So this is a chart that demonstrates what Web 3 is. So, and what Web 3 and Web 5 is. Basically, Web 2 plus 3 equals to 5. Web 5 is the efficient and seamless interoperation between centralized and decentralized system. The whole point is that when you have, there are two elements in order to make a Web3 company operational. Nowadays, we have seen a lot of, especially in the past year, we've heard a lot of scary stories about how centralized companies, the most recent instances, Standard Chartered and the certain brand of credit card being hacked. When you have a database that is centralized, it's so much easier to be subject to a cyber attack. Because cyber attack is not usually how the greatest threat that people have that companies experience when there's a cyber attack is not so much as the theft of your data. It's actually the alteration of the data. And because all the data is stored in one single centralized location, when it's altered, you can't find the original. So banks are particularly exposed because when your ledger is hacked and changed, you don't know where the money went because your account suddenly loses a certain amount of money. The whole concept of using decentralization, which is where blockchain really shines, is the way that blockchain works is that data is not stored just on any centralized location. It's simultaneously stored in a decentralized format across the entire span of the internet. The result is if a cyber criminal wants to compromise a certain database, unless they gain control over 51% of the entire decentralized network space, the alteration of that data is quite difficult. And when it comes to a Web3 company, the whole concept is predicated on the most vulnerable data ought to be stored on decentralized network. And that control ought to be given back to a data holder so that you can decide what you want to do with it. And when you want to use it, you can integrate it back with a Web2 company and basically have the resulting business transaction. So that's really how it works. But to explain this fully will require like a multi-hour lecture, which is time that we do not have today. But if you are not geeked out enough sufficiently at this point, you're more than welcome to take the side conversation with me after today's course. So our vision is that we see the opportunity that Web3 and 5 really brought about, and we really and one of the key factors is one of the key things that we're implementing is the concept of smart contracts. Now, to very briefly describe what smart contract is, it's actually not a concept that is very new. It's not a concept that only came out this past few years. A smart contract is basically a contract which has certain parts of it that's machine operated. Now, when you have a contract that does not require human elements of performance, it actually removes a lot of potential for disputes. a lot of times it's actually the human factors in the performance of the contract that has led to a lot of litigation happening in today's commercial world. And the whole idea of smart contract where a contract can self-perform certain provisions such as payments by basically detecting when the other aspect of the contract is completed, that really comes about. Now, in the past, before the innovation of decentralized networks such as blockchain occurred, smart contract can also be very dangerous, because if you have a contract that have control of all of your funds and somebody managed to hack and change it, they can basically drain all the funds away. That's how rug pulls actually happen, is spotting the backdoor and the inefficiency in a smart contract. Blockchain technology, however, creates enable us to have immutability. And by having immutable contracts, meaning smart contracts that's not at risk of being altered by a cyber criminal unless they gain control over a network, of course. It's actually the technological breakthrough that's required to really actualize the whole concept of smart contract. And a smart contract, but there are problems, of course, we see with smart contracts as well. One of the biggest problems with smart contract is when it's all written in computer codes. Despite the fact that it's called a contract, is it legally enforceable? And the short answer, it's not, and I'll explain that later. But our mission, of course, is to create products that basically capitalize on certain technological breakthrough within the blockchain space, as well as basically monetize it. So, before we talk about the legal and regulatory pitfalls, which includes whether a smart contract is enforceable or not, we'll continue to quickly look at the market and opportunity. Now, as we can see, during the past year, we have a lot of fluctuation between the interests within the Web3 space. But there are certain, it is often said that by 2035, 40% of the global market is likely to exist within the Web3 luxury markets. Now, we have seen application of Web3 technologies, such as the minting of NFTs within the fashion and beauty space. Food and beverage companies. We'll explain how basically NFTs can work. Actually, I can explain it right now. NFT is actually more than just a token that you can have experience. Some of these companies are actually using digitization as a tool to give consumers a different experience. Now, NFTs, a lot of times is said it's like a pre-sale. Basically, if you buy a token, you get to experience certain food and beverages in the future. But what has happened now is one of the things that we have made a breakthrough in is that in the past, NFTs are nothing more than a token with a hyperlink to a certain website. Nowadays, you are able to basically, we have actually, our company at least, have been able to solve a data capacity issue where we are able to upload virtually unlimited amounts of data onto the blockchain. This creates a very unique thing because, one, you can basically have the legal instruments minted onto a token, but on top of that, you can have the augmented reality or virtual mixed reality experience also minted onto a token. What can happen is, with certain AR technologies embedded, you are potentially able to have visual stimulation as well as have taste stimulation data on a token that you can experience food and beverage in a different manner. So imagine if you bought a whiskey NFT. In the past, you can redeem that NFT for a bottle of whiskey, but that's the extent of it. In the future, what your paper coupon cannot do, but a token can do is a vineyard or a producer might be able to encapsulate, capture the taste of a certain special brand or bottle of whiskey and upload that data onto the blockchain. And holder of those tokens will be able to access that data for augmented reality tasting of that whiskey. So that not only is the NFT a certificate of how you own that bottle of whiskey at one point of time, it's actually now there's a technology. In Japan, for example, there's the lickable screen technology. So if you're able to basically shrink that technology into a pallet size, holder of digital tokens of food and beverage products are able to basically re-experience a taste of what a certain bottle of whiskey might have tasted like, despite the fact that the physical equivalent might have been drank years ago. Of course, we have gaming companies that is also that also went into the Web3 space. So why Web5? As I've mentioned, it's there are several things involved. There's an immersive experience because depending on the way that you package your Web5 products, such as what we always say, tokens, you can have a fully immersive mixed reality experience. It's also community building. What you see in a lot of Web5 projects nowadays is instead of just simply minting a token, they will create an entire interactive community that have constant community engagement. This is substantially different from physical stores, businesses that you have, where you might have a client that comes in, that's a patron of a food and beverage experience. They leave, and that's the extent of the interaction, and that's why you see a lot of restaurants opening with lines of customers waiting outside for the first 6 months and slowly dying off. In a Web5 space, the community engagement between a business owner and their patron and clients continues because they're building a platform. That is something that requires a talk for many hours, of course, on how to do, but that's the other reason why people now venture into the Web5 space. And of course, there's brand building elements, what we call brand activation. As I've mentioned, nowadays, business do not just simply thrive by having the prime real estate, but really depends on how they secure an online domain and how they activate their brand and making it known. And to really have that success, you have to have the community as well as the people knowing about that brand. So these are some basic statistics that I pulled off about metaverse marketing statistics as of 2022. It's valued at $47 billion. Of course, we have seen market correction over the past year, but a lot of analysts have said that the crypto and virtual market has already bottomed out. And there's a lot of exciting things. Now, knowing that time is on the economy, you all can have access to these slides after the lecture, so that you can go through it in further details. Now, this is another chart that really demonstrates what Web5 is. And how the metaverse is a convergence point. Now, this is an interesting conversation that I had with a CTO actually about why metaverse. Now, a lot of people, one of the funniest instances is our CTO actually said, oh, you can walk, by having a metaverse where you have a digital recreation of a physical location, you can walk down the streets of Singapore. On the metaverse, and I was like, why would I do that when I can just simply walk down the real streets, right? The real critical factor to determine whether metaverse project succeeds or not, in my view, is actually application. For example, if you are having a pitch or a virtual meeting, you'll probably be using just Zoom or Microsoft Teams because you want to see the reaction on the other side. Now, the real instance that justify having a metaverse is actually when you have a need for it. For example, when you have a pitch, a lot of times people actually travel overseas with their entire team to do a pitches because they want to demonstrate a product. And that's where it becomes very expensive. Now, you can't do a pitch online either by Microsoft meetings, because Microsoft Teams or Zoom, because that's a face-to-face conversation. You want to see each other's reaction, but not the product. The metaverse actually enables you to transport your audience to a showroom that really justifies the experience. And this is where Web 5 really shines in. It basically integrates real and virtual together. At the same time, it has centralized and decentralized elements for transaction, such as that enables much more seamless cross-border transaction. And it basically bridges between the tangible and the intangible elements of your life. Basically, when I say metaverse, I always say that it requires technological breakthrough that is able to bridge the 5 senses of a human experience before you're able to really have the real metaverse. Now, not to say anything bad about Facebook, but that is not a metaverse, because you're just having that avatar traveling within that space. Is actually, if I wanted to have that experience, I would just play World of Warcraft instead. But this is actually quite different. So basically, very quickly to talk about blockchain. Blockchain. A lot of people are very bullish about blockchain because of the rise and fall of the crypto markets. Of course, blockchain is actually what we call digital ledger technology. So when we talk about Web 5, Web 3 space, we actually say that we don't really believe in virtual assets, because what we really believe in is actually how the technology is applied. And in our view, it's actually, you're not applying the technology correctly unless you have smart contracts and decentralized elements implemented. What we're saying is that true blockchain companies actually simply use digital ledger technology in the way that it's actually invented. It's a recording tool that enables you to capture commercial contracts. This is what we call Ricardian contract, which means a contract that is both human readable as well as machine readable. Now, when I was doing my lecture earlier, I have mentioned that a lot of people love the idea about smart contract, but they quickly run into a lot of legal issues when they try to enforce it in the event of a dispute. The reason being is that even in British courts, there's already judgments out saying smart contracts, which are purely in computer codes, are not legally enforceable contract because they do not have all the elements of the contract. When we have what we call digital ownership tokens, which in effect is using blockchain technology to capture a contract, that is different because it's a legally recognized piece of token in the sense that, firstly, all the elements of a contract are encapsulated within the token, which I'll talk about in a moment. But at the same time, it has both human readable and machine readable elements that actually enable you to use blockchain technology. So the real characteristics that we are trying to do is basically fuse all 3 elements together. Now, before I introduce what a digital ownership token, which I've alluded to just now, I'll talk about all the hidden crises that came forward within this past year. Now, a lot of you might have been familiar with the Bored Apes project, NFTs that have been skyrocketed in value into the millions of dollars. At that time, when the Bored Apes was minted, they did it without having any terms and conditions, and they didn't even bother writing a white paper. The fact is, people are buying a token that's nothing more than a hyperlink. And you can't blame them, because back in the day, when NFTs actually first came about, due to the fact that there are certain technological constraints, when you mint a token, that's all you can mint on it. Now, the result is, there's a lot of arguments saying whether Bored Apes have proper conveyance of IP, because the creators realize that they're only selling hyperlinks, know that hyperlinks are valueless because the website beyond the hyperlink can be changed at any time. So they try to do something that's like, oh, we'll tell our users that they're actually buying the IP to the artwork that they're buying. And the way they did it is, oh, we'll do an amendment to the terms and conditions, which, if you read the entire piece of document, say, is subject to change by Lava Labs at any time. So there's a lot of hidden prices involved in early day projects. So and that resulted in a lot of regulators' investigation to it. So as I've mentioned, knowing that I'm on my last 20 minutes, there's the issue of whether early projects have proper sale and purchase of IP, which is being advertised. And a lot of times you'll see that there is not, because a creator will have assets, they will basically create what we call a license agreement that issue the NFT. But the NFT holder itself was never actually given the arts and the IP rights that were actually issued. And this is because when you look at the data that's stored on the blockchain at that time, which requires investigation, there's basically they didn't upload the artwork, nor did they have legal contracts uploaded onto a blockchain. So a lot of times, this is why regulators are now stepping in and say, look, there might be misrepresentation of what you're selling. And when you have ideas of, oh, you can fractionalize an ownership of an artwork, that is actually a security product by itself. Because whenever you talk about percentage ownership in an investment, issues of collective investment schemes and security products will arise. So basically, you have the issue of IP as well whenever you're a Web3 business. So it's actually, now you might actually believe in Web3 space and you were like, oh, I want to start a Web3 business today, but there are actually a lot of legal pitfalls. Because if you are like saying, I have this wonderful artwork that I want to sell, but all you did is basically put it on OpenSea and try to mint a token and sell it, you might have misrepresentation because you're only selling the token that have a link to where the artwork is. You're not selling the artwork itself. And even so, over the past year, it's actually really like the Wild West. You have people that started minting digital equivalents of products that they don't own. There's a case where somebody decided to basically use Hermes bags as and create NFTs of it, and then they got sued because it's a ripoff of somebody else's brand. Of course, it's a very murky area that requires a long lecture over. When you talk about IP within the Web3 space, your IP law by itself is very territorial in nature. So questions arise on who can sue, who can be sued, and what to sue are all questions that will arise. Of course, fortunately, you can actually secure your IP rights within the Web3 space by basically filing a Class 9 application, which is basically downloadable digital files. But a lot of people don't even bother doing that when they're doing business on the e-commerce market. So lots of risk involved. Then, of course, other risk involved when you set up a business online includes data privacy risk. For example, well, it's actually really great that you, by just creating a website, the world's customers is at your fingertips. The problem actually arises on if you do business with a European entity or a European customer. How do you basically deal with the data? Because data privacy law like GDPR might kick in and might come back and bite you later on in the future. So unless you basically have a very concrete legal framework established within your e-commerce company, you're actually exposed to all sorts of risk. And what we see is a lot of online projects are very good in concept, but the way that they're launched is actually very poorly in terms of legal framework, resulting in a lot of unnecessary costs after for example, if you're the owner of the Bored Apes, you have regulators to contend with at this time. Then, of course, there's cybersecurity. OpenSea has actually made headlines in the past year because people are able to exploit certain vulnerabilities in the way that their platform was designed and steal NFTs. And you see litigation against the platform for having cybersecurity lapse. So this is, again, could have been mitigated had they had the proper legal framework in place. Now, the solution, of course, I would say is what we call the digital ownership token. So, digital ownership token, as I mentioned, entails us using the latest breakthrough in blockchain technology, which a token is no longer limited in the amount of data that can be stored. So, one of the things that Collectibles did in its early days is that because we're actually transacting very high value antiques, one of the things that that's part and parcel of the token is actually the legal instrumentation. So instead of having a smart contract that's purely code, what you see in a DOT or a digital ownership token is actually a legal equivalent Ricardian contract minted onto the blockchain. And by having a piece of contract that fulfills all the legal requirements that comes with contract law, you're able to crystallize that birth certificate ownership because unlike the past, which is what we explained to the SEC, where people can dispute about whether a contract even existed, the metadata is able to capture it in a decentralized format where you know exactly what time is a contract made, who are the parties, etc. And all that data is now suddenly stored onto the blockchain, which is not something that can be altered. And this is actually when the SEC actually saw this, and they were like, oh, this is not NFT at all, because this token actually represents so much more, hence the term digital ownership token. And there are other things that we have actually placed onto our tokens, which made it unique. This includes valuation report of an assets. Now, a lot of times when you buy a property, you actually go to a valuation expert to basically assess the value of how much an antique is worth or how much a real estate is worth. What we have done that is not available in most of the open market, for example, the Bored Apes, they don't have valuation experts. We have valuation reports of how much an asset is worth, and that is also minted onto the blockchain. So when regulators see this, they're very happy about it because suddenly you have a piece of token that is not just purely driven by market sentiments. Because whenever you have a transaction, there's always the fair value and the market value. Fair value is basically how much a valuator assesses this particular antique is worth. Market value is basically driven by how much the open market is willing to pay for your property. This is why when you see traditional virtual assets, they can increase in value substantially on one moment and crash in value the next, because they don't have this stabilization document that's minted onto a blockchain. But the beauty of it is by minting a valuation report onto the blockchain, you also create something called provenance. And that is something very important to most art collectors, because a Picasso painting was actually valueless when it was first painted, but it suddenly grew in value because a celebrity owned it. And all that is suddenly able to, you're suddenly able to encapsulate and record it onto the blockchain, and it's no longer contestable. So, in the traditional arts market, Chinese paintings, for example, the way that a lot of valuation experts have to assess a value is flip it over and look at the chain of ownership. That's where all the stamps comes from. In the future, we will see it, and when you can have fake stamps, of course, but in the future, you will have a chain of ownership recorded onto a blockchain that is no longer contestable, and all the basically provenance data is stored on it. It's basically a huge breakthrough. And most importantly is augmented reality, the beyond transaction aspect of a DOT. So I used to joke that for a lot of collectors of antiques, it's actually old people. And when they have it at home or they have kids come by, they spend a lot of efforts trying to explain why this imperial jade seal is worth this much money and the history behind it. Of course, the kids will fall asleep or just not listen to them automatically. But with a DOT, you are able to give holders a completely different experience because you're suddenly able to basically have augmented reality by simply wearing a pair of augmented reality glasses. You suddenly can have something like called curator on demand. That's what we have at least. Or we have somebody that can pop out and explain the history behind a particular artwork. And on top of that, you don't have boring museum librarians telling you the history. Imagine if you have Chris Hemsworth in the six packs telling you about the history behind an artwork. Yes, it's suddenly a lot more attentive. So this is what the DOT is able to achieve, and this is why we see such huge opportunities within the market for this space. Now I'm down to my last 9 minutes, so I have to jump through the last few minutes, few slides relatively quickly in order to leave Q&A, of course. But essentially, all we're trying to say is, by integrating the DOT at the core, we are finally able to basically justify existence of NFT within the market, and the application of blockchain and metaverse technology creates what we call Web 5 as a service that can be offered to companies alike. We have been serving a number of companies, including real estate, to develop basically help them jump into the Web3 space early, because you don't want to become the next Walmart. You want to become the next Amazon by being within the new digital space early. Now, of course, we can't basically conclude this session without talking about success cases. These are basically some of the success cases that we have done, and what utility tokens and whatnot can be done. These slides will be made available afterwards if you guys are interested, of course. I don't have enough time to talk about metaverse actually. So we're now towards the end of the lecture before the Q&A session, which we have 5 minutes for. But I would just like to conclude this session by thanking everyone for attending on a Sunday, understanding. And as a gesture of thanks, we want to give you the full experience by saying that any attendees today will get a free NFT from us or a free DOT from us. Here is the slide. I see some of you taking photos. It's very important for this slide to be taken because by emailing us, you receive instructions on how to redeem your free NFT for having attended today's session. Again, thank you so much. I know it's a compression of a lot of information within a 1 hour time frame, and I would like to leave some time for Q&A towards the end of this lecture.
Web 5 equals to Web 2 plus Web 3. So, as my understanding, Web 2 is only about right. Web 1 is about read. Well, actually, there have some interaction for Web 2, and Web 3 is kind of application. So the data owner will be the user itself. Can use the data they provide to the platform.
So your question is actually is trying to differentiate what is the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 essentially, if I understand it correctly.
You said Web 2 plus Web 3 equals Web 5.
Yes, Web 2 plus Web 3, because Web 3 is Web 2 is basically what we have today, centralized websites. but they're interactive because at the end of the day, they require user input to basically create the output that you want. But it's all centralized data. So Facebook is a very good example, or even Tmall is a good example. You input certain data in order to basically say, I want to buy this item. And then the website, through your input, will basically display information that the website thinks is applicable to you. The big complaint against a lot of Web 2 companies is how they harvest user data through data caches, and cookies, of course. And the whole concept of Web 3 is we want to return the control of your personal data to retain through to by you. So Web3 elements have things like blockchain as well as decentralization, but also the application of virtual assets on how to buy things, right? So today you can basically, in the US, you can buy coffee with Bitcoin. So basically Web 5 is where you want to integrate both Web 2 elements and Web 3 elements together. By having a seamless approach where you can
centralized plus decentralized.
Precisely. So basically, it's a form of zero knowledge proof because you have to understand a lot of people when they talk about wanting that pseudo anonymity when they're transacting Bitcoin it's not that they don't want the entire world to know how rich they are. They want to basically be able to trade anonymously so that, for example, if you hold up 500 Bitcoins, the last thing you want is everyone to know that you have 500 Bitcoins when you're traveling in India, because that's like saying, come and kidnap me. The whole concept of zero knowledge proof is you are onboarded to an exchange, for example, which you go through the entire process of know your client, KYC and AML process. And they assign you a pseudo identity that you can use to trade without having all that data also online. Because what is online can always be accessed by cyber criminals. That's a fact. There's no such thing as a foolproof cybersecurity system. What we can do is actually segregate the information. And what you want in Web3 is basically control your identity and your personal data without basically exposing all that data on. And Web 5 is the integration of your ability to use that pseudo identity to trade with all these Web 2 solutions, and that takes a lot of design to basically complete. Because today, most Web 2 companies such as Amazon and traditional e-commerce enterprise, all you can do is basically use your credit card and transact. And that's where you have all these cybercrime cases coming. Hackers orchestrating what we call a man-in-the-middle attack, hack the Web 2 company, and extract all your credit card information.
So centralized,
yeah. And because everything is centralized, they can't do anything about it. And once they harvested your credit card information, they go on a shopping spree. The concept of Web3 is how to improve your experience by basically making it impossible for a cyber criminal to collect all the elements of data that will put you at risk. And to truly commercialize and capitalize everything, you have to have the Web 2 plus 3, Web 5. And if you are a fully Web 5 capable company, then you will be the first to basically offer a solution to the wider public and say, look, come and trade that my marketplace, and we offer you a completely safe environment to do whatever you want. It can be a marketplace, it can be all sorts of other interactive environments as well.
And another question is about the smart contract.
Yes.
So just as you mentioned, in the NFT, they have, for example, traditional like this T, and they can give you a token, it's OT, and they also need the smart contract to be exact test. You said both in the coding and other in the human language, natural language. So then you can, because in case of any
arguments between two commercial parties is something that's unavoidable. As long as contract has existed for the past 3,000 years, there are disputes that have came as a result of disagreements on whether you have performed the contract to your satisfaction or not. So fundamental behind why we need written contract today is the element of legal enforceability, because only the courts can order certain people to do certain things at the end of the day. Now, smart contract is the idea of saying it's self-enforced because everything is automated once two parties came to an agreement. But even then, there are certain unforeseeable circumstances that can result in disputes. That is why, in order to have a truly functioning smart contract, you need something what we call a Ricardian contract. The concept of Ricardian contract is nothing new. It actually came out in the 1960s. But it's not something that can be done because the technology is not up to par in the 1960s. So Ricardian contract is very simple. It basically say that a contract that exists in both code as well as human readable text. When you have pure code smart contract, a judge would simply say, this is not in English. It doesn't have any clause that I can actually make a judgment on. Hence, it's not legally enforceable. But when you have, what we have today is several aspects. We have blockchain, but we also have something called natural language programming, AI, that enables the machine to read human contracts and perform it. And when you have a contract that's both Ricardian, that's in Ricardian contract, that is both recorded on the blockchain, that's machine readable, hence the smart contract element, but also human readable because it's that physical contract is actually minted onto the blockchain itself. It suddenly becomes a legally enforceable smart contract that is so far absent in the vast majority of the Web3 space. But it's made possible today. Of course, that's what we call a digital ownership token. So if you satisfy all those elements, you have a DOT. And by reaching that standard, people are able to trade in a much better fashion.
So even AR plus VR, I mean, you can have a smell and taste of for the
Yes.
ownership.
So a DOT goes beyond just a transaction because a lot of times one biggest problem with a lot of virtual assets is it's a lot of hype, but it doesn't really have a lot of application. And we want our tokens to actually have application. So in another interview I did recently, I talk about how a lot of virtual assets in the past, we have seen a lot of cryptocurrencies, for example, which are just minted with a name, but there's no assets behind it, hence the volatility in the pricing. Those will go away. We actually do not believe in virtual assets. What we truly believe in is the utilization of Web5 technology that serves as a digital wrapper in order to capture and encapsulate commercial terms so that you will have virtual assets with substance. Those will stay behind. It's like in the dot-com boom and dot-com bust in the past. People basically spending thousands or millions of dollars securing fancy domain names, but never built a business behind the website web address, simply lose value over time. But companies that secure domain names such as Amazon and other eBay and other e-commerce giants, they built actual products behind that domain name. Those are worth millions and billions of dollars today. And that's what we'll see in Web5 space as well. Companies that move in, but never basically fulfill all the remaining criteria of building a real business behind Web3 space will lose value over time. But if you have actual business behind it, that's where you become a pioneer in Web3 space. And that's how you become the next Amazon. But of course, if you become the next Amazon and if you're very successful, we used to joke that regulators will only investigate your company if you're very rich. Like, for example, when you look at NFT projects, SEC only goes after the ones that make hundreds of millions of dollars. They don't go after the little guys because there's no money to extract from them. After all, a regulatory action is what we call alternative taxation.